We talked about veterans who lost from the NFL draft, but what about the guys that actually walked away from the draft gaining value? Yeah, there are some big veteran winners here. We might be bummed out because our favorite rookies went to literally the most dreadful landing spots, but the positive side is for that all of the weird draft picks and lack of depth, we've got a ton of veterans who ended up not only safe, but actually in a better position than they were heading into the draft. So who should be on your radar for prime fantasy draft targets? There was a ton of smoke around the Chiefs adding a first-round pass catcher like Jordan Tyson, Mekhi Lemon, Kenyon Sadiq. Instead, the only receiver that they added was Cyrus Allen at the end of the 5th round. Now, say what you want about whether or not Rashee Rice can actually stay out of trouble and on the field, but when he is on the field, he genuinely has top 5 upside, and there is no competition for him on this team. And the fact that they did not make an investment into a receiver knowing that Rice is a 2027 free agent actually says a lot. So this draft was huge for him. They can't rely on Travis Kelce long term because of age, right? And Xavier Worthy has proven that he's a piece, a really cool piece, right? But not a true wide receiver one. I see this as a vote of confidence that if Rice can put up numbers and be a model citizen, he would be a big long-term asset in this offense. At the very least, though, he is absolutely the first look in this offense in 2026. Rice does have a lot to prove. We only saw him in 8 games in 2025, but he was a top 10 receiver in 5 of those games, and he averaged nearly 10 targets per game and had 6 touchdowns. And the 3 games where he wasn't a top 10 receiver were against Denver, Houston, and the LA Chargers. Perfectly understandable. Also, as a note, because of where Rice plays on the field, often out of the slot with a significantly lower ADOT than everyone else on the team, just 4.9 average yards per target, any lingering effects for Patrick Mahomes' injury would least affect Rice. Quite frankly, the upside could even be a little bit higher because if he lowers his rush attempts, if Patrick Mahomes lowers his rush attempts, there would be an increased pass volume specifically for Rice. Rice averaged 15.5 fantasy points per game and half PPR last season. That is the 5th most of any receiver. I am not exaggerating when I'm saying that if he stays on the field, he is genuinely a top 5 asset. Realistically, Jeremiah Love was never getting anywhere near Cincinnati's pick, but I would be lying if the fact that they were entertaining it didn't really spook me into thinking that this meant they were finally going to make a meaningful addition at running back, especially with the fact that Chase Brown is in a contract year. Instead, they did nothing. They are running it back with the same group, and our boys' competition is Samaje Perine, and we know how that goes, right? Brown might not be the highest volume back or the most efficient or the most special, but there may not be a more reliable back in the NFL at this point in terms of job security, high floor, and oddly enough, a very reasonable amount of work on the ground, which means that he never actually falls victim to wear or tear or excessive usage. It's a very unique combination that I don't think anybody else has. The first 5 games of the 2025 season were a disaster with Jake Browning at quarterback. We exclude that. That doesn't count. Joe Flacco started in week 6, and from week 6 through the end of the season, Chase Brown was RB8 in average fantasy points per game. That is more than James Cook, Kyron Williams, Travis Etienne, and Saquon Barkley, who I do love, but, it's born to note there. Brown also has a very high usage, a stupid high usage of receiving work. 69 receptions on 8 targets last season. The only downside is that because the touchdowns never really go through him at an extreme clip, and it's not going to happen, right? Because you have Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, and T. Higgins, it means that he can't actually give you top 5 production for an entire season, right? But he's a very safe bet to finish as a low-end RB1, a very comfortable pick. I would argue that no one gained as much from this draft, or really the entire offseason, than Tyler Shough. Instead of winning through a lack of draft picks like the other guys on this list, Tyler Shough wins through the addition of players. The Saints upgraded to Travis Etienne in free agency and added Jordan Tyson in the draft. The addition of Tyson is huge because the Saints had an incredibly depleted receiving core in 2025. Obviously, Chris Olave is fantastic, but it was literally just him and Juwan Johnson. Tyler Shough couldn't even benefit from having a strong running back. Jordan Tyson obviously is a fantastic prospect and arguably has the highest ceiling of all of the rookies if he remains healthy. So, in a perfect world, Tyler Shough will have one of the most formidable wide receiver duos in the league. Shough also benefits because of consistency, right? He will play through the same exact system that he had last season. No major changes and pretty much just the addition of more weapons. Literally everything is pointing in a positive direction for him to build on his 2025 debut, which was surprisingly very strong. Shough played 11 games, but he really only roughly started about half the season. He pushed a very good amount of volume with over 2,000 yards. He showed rushing upside as well. He is in a fantastic spot, and the Saints front office really did very, very well by him. The Packers actually fooled me on this one. I thought that Emmanuel Wilson moving on meant that we would end up with the Packers drafting a running back in round 4 or 5 for depth, and that pick would make everybody flip out, decrease the value of Josh Jacobs, and I was ready to buy the dip. I was super excited. Instead, the Packers ignored the position, and they're running it back with Marshawn Lloyd and Chris Brooks as the backups. Even if Lloyd can actually stay healthy, he's no competition for Josh Jacobs. All of the worries that Jacobs is hitting a wall are well at ease. And he is in line for the perfect bounce back season off of what on paper does look like an underwhelming season that was marred by nagging injuries. And I know that some people are concerned when they look at the 2025 stats because it does look like a massive dip in his workload and efficiency, but it wasn't. You just have to contextualize what actually happened. 234 carries on 15 games seems ugly on the surface for sure, but the Packers were making a playoff push, and he tried to play through the injury. Very admirable, very appreciative. It did end up kind of sort of working, right? But he shouldn't have played through it. So the numbers are weird, and they look worse than they actually were because there were games where he literally played a very small amount of snaps. When he was healthy, he was pumping out touchdowns, and he still managed 14 on the season. Fresher legs, no injuries will result in better efficiency. He is still a high volume guy and he has no competition. So there were two running backs that were at risk with the Jeremiah Love sweepstakes. It was Cam Skattebo and Tony Pollard. Tony Pollard is not on this list because he basically got a one-season reprieve. He didn't actually gain much long-term value. He's on the end of his dynasty leash, and even in redraft, we worry that there's going to be someone else creeping in, like a Nick Singleton this season, given the fact that he's a 2027 free agent, right? Probably going to hit the market at age 30. So no big change to his value, but Cam Skattebo's value was massively saved. We talked about this. Pollard would likely end up getting cut and hit the market anyway. It didn't matter. You're hitting the market in 2026 or 2027 if they drafted Love, right? But if Love landed with the Giants, Cam Skattebo's remaining contract would be relegated to literally just being a backup. Now he escaped the draft and he is in line to be the RB1, and we'll hopefully see him make a very nice return from the injury and get a full season of him as the RB1. I've never really had an aggressive stance one way or the other on Cam Skattebo, but he did show a lot of upside last year. Our sample size is small, but the key for me is his usage in the passing game. He handled checkdowns very well, and he was very productive with them. And that says a lot, considering that Tyrone Tracy's specialty is obviously receiving. Now, it is a new regime, and that does make me want to say that we do want to exercise a little bit of caution, right? Drafting him around RB20 is fine, but going over that would be concerning because this is Matt Nagy. Matt Nagy, who was 100% responsible for sending Kansas City into that awful, nasty, unusable committee. But apples to apples, Skattebo is the better back here, so hopefully Matt Nagy handles this situation appropriately. This one is kind of funny to me. Clearly, Bhayshul Tuten's value should be on the rise after the Jags passed on running backs in the draft. Bhayshul Tuten escaped free agency, and he escaped the draft relatively unscathed, and yet I'm still hearing that Tuten is not going to be the RB1. Honestly, it is entirely possible that Chris Rodriguez does get the most burn here, but Tuten is the only one that can realistically be a third down back. Chris Rodriguez did have a very solid 2025 season with Washington, but do not underestimate the effective work that Bhayshul Tuten did last season just because the volume wasn't massive. The most glaring takeaway from last year is his red zone efficiency. Tuten had 24 attempts inside the red zone. He converted 5 of those attempts into touchdowns, and 4 of those attempts were inside the 5. That is a very impressive conversion rate that was actually better than Travis Etienne's. He also had 2 red zone receptions that were converted into 2 touchdowns as well. That level of red zone trust as a rookie backup is very specific, and it leaves me feeling very confident in how this staff does feel about him in 2026. The only question that we have here is if he can develop as a blocker to secure third down work there, because we know for sure that cannot be Chris Rodriguez's role. That is not his specialty, is never going to be there. Now, they did sign Jamari Taylor as an undrafted rookie who absolutely does not profile as a lead back, right? But could logically be a candidate for a change of pace, third down work, right? But to that extent, LeQuint Allen Jr. is actually more of a threat on that end, and we were already accounting for that, right? He already existed. So we'll need to see how this offseason ultimately shakes out, but this draft absolutely was a win for Tuten. Right off the bat, I will say this. I think people are somewhat underestimating DeVonta Smith's ability to be a wide receiver 1. The absence of A.J. Brown does not mean the absence of that production, and it does not mean that that production will shift to the new rookie receiver equally, right? And Smith has shown the ability to operate as the wide receiver 1 when A.J. Brown was dealing with injuries. Our sample size is small, but we know who he is as a talent. Realistically, he is T. Higgins to me, right? In terms of a similar situation that we could compare to. Logically, if Jamar Chase was traded, right? Because he is objectively better than T. Higgins, and if he was traded and a new rookie was added, I would expect T. Higgins to perform as the wide receiver 1, and his value with Jamar Chase would shoot through the roof. We should be seeing that with DeVonta Smith, but we're not seeing it in the same way that you would think. And a lot of that has to do with last season's production. The 2025 Eagles season cast a very ugly shadow on the entire offense to the point where I feel like everyone is forgetting what this offense can be when it is performing at its best. A.J. Brown's frustration last year was valid, but lest we forget, the man had over 1,400 yards in his first 2 seasons with Philadelphia. And third season, 2024, 17-game pace was also over 1,400 yards. Last year, he barely cracked 1,000, so again, understandable. But the Eagles' entire offense was wonky last season. We're going to see a new-look Eagles in 2026 with DeVonta Smith and Mekhi Lemon leading the way. We shouldn't expect Lemon to be a A.J. Brown replacement, right? They're not the same player. We should evaluate this receiving core for the skill sets that they offer separately from what we saw last year and previous years. Lemon offers versatility, but his most logical usage is in the slot, with Smith getting increased usage on the outside. I do consider Smith a big post-draft winner, despite the fact that a major rookie was added, because I think he can ascend and be the wide receiver 1 here. Thanks for watching this video. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. You can find me across all social media platforms at It's Tera Time. I am also live every Wednesday on YouTube at 8 p.m. EST, so make sure that you stop by and chat. It is always a good time. You can ask me any questions that you want. You can also subscribe to my Substack if you want to support me another way. And if you are looking for new fantasy football tools in 2026, look at Player Profiler. You can use my promo code TERA for 25% off at Player Profiler.